without further ado, just a quick intro. Brian Coleman has a deep background in traditional finance, having worked as a portfolio manager and investment officer, and like many of us, he traveled down the Hedera rabbit hole, becoming an HBAR barbarian, and over the years, he's been on this crazy ride with the rest of us. And most recently, of course, as I mentioned, launched Hashpoint, which transforms raw ledger data into valuable context, refined investment insights for HBAR holders. So, Brian, it's so great to have you on the show. It's really been awesome to see Hashpoint launch and kind of take the ecosystem by storm. And since the launch on Monday, how's the experience been on your end? Is this the first project you've kind of brought to the Hedera ecosystem?
Yeah, actually, it is the first. It's not the first idea, but yeah, it's the first one that got legs and got launched, and it just came out of my own need, desire to kind of see the data in a way that made sense and provided information. And ultimately the point was, you get sold on the technology and what Hashgraph, the consensus algorithm, means to DLT and DLT adoptions, and how it enables enterprise adoption. And once you get comfortable with that, you start to recognize it as DLTs might be new, but we've seen this before. You've seen it with processors, you've seen it with bandwidth, you've seen it with storage. There's kind of that seminal event that makes, that kind of kicks off these disruptive technologies, and they go from, playgrounds and, interesting, maybe kind of, but missing the mark of the, of where the established companies need these technologies to be. Then they have that moment, and I think Hashgraph is that moment for DLTs. And so then the question becomes, all right, if I buy into the trend here, and I buy into the adoption story, and I think this looks like microprocessors back in 1971, and how is this market going to develop, and how do you value HBAR? That was really the starting point. And so it's thinking about the asset and its multiple purposes, which is unique in itself. The pricing model in Hedera is unique within DLTs. So there isn't a lot of there's not a lot of textbook valuation theory to rely on. It's a financial asset, so you can look at its future cash flows as the source of its value, but it kind of required a unique, to really sit down and think about what HBAR is and what's going to drive it, and the realities of a proof of stake network, and that became that's the origin story for Hashpoint. And then the rest of it is then understanding the data that you need to look at to really look at valuation scenarios. And so those data models then got built up around, or for the purpose of feeding the valuation model. And everybody likes to, I'm guilty too, everybody likes to look at the spinning dial, the TPS rolling, and the gauges, and but it's really, it's really, the data is to provide the context for, all right, we've all, assumingly everybody's kind of bought into the long story here for Hedera. And now it's, how do we value it, and how do we measure it going forward, and how do we know if we're on track or not? And, and how do you have a voice? If you don't have the data and you don't have context, how do you make an argument that something should be done, or something isn't being done, or the wrong thing is being done?
Gotcha. It's so funny. Like as soon as we start talking, my brain starts going. I had a couple notes, but now I feel like they're totally irrelevant, because you just got me going with those comparisons with some other industries, specifically the tech industry. And you're right. It's almost like when I look at the GPU industry and how AI has impacted that, there's an element of you start out going one direction that turns out success lies in a completely other direction you couldn't see. And when we look at NVIDIA as a company, they could like barely get computer graphics figured out back in the day. They had a bit of a breakthrough, and then came blockchain and Bitcoin mining, and then came AI. And now you have this like incredibly successful company. And then it also makes me think of things like, you know, you're definitely familiar with the Lehman Harvard talk, you know, probably someone myself watch it regularly, but you know, in that talk again, Lehman compares this industry and the different DLT technologies inside the industry as these companies during the dot-com bubble. And you have this rise of a bazillion different companies and then a collapse and a few survive. So maybe, you know, I just wanted to kind of expand on some of that thinking a little bit, because I think that's a topic that the community's coming back to a little bit. Now that Hedera has gone so forward and evolved and matured as an ecosystem, we're starting to think about that again. Like, how does this play out in this kind of blockchain industry? And how does that kind of thesis of Lehman's kind of hold? You know, what are your thoughts on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's funny. It's as an investor in technology, you think there's a technical skill required and there's a financial skill required, but really it's a lot of just imagination.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, in 1971, when the Intel 4004 processor, I guess the first single chip processor, was introduced. You know, it had 2,300 transistors on it, and it was, I think it cost, you know, $60, which would be a lot more in today's money, but a couple cents per transistor. And the latest Apple processor has, you know, 130 billion
something
on
crazy.
it. So when you go from 2,300 transistors to, like, you can't forecast what's going to happen, but as the price per unit continues to drop, it just opens up new markets. You know, and it's a trend, and you just have to, you kind of, as an investor, you have to believe that trend is unfolding. And I think that's what Hashgraph is, that kind of seminal moment in DLTs, where you take the price of a transaction from, you know, dollars for some networks and variable, and you drop it down to, you know, consensus at 1/100th of a penny. And fixed. And that's got the same effect as dropping the price of transistors in semiconductors. It opens up new markets. You know, Avery Dennison would not build Atma if it was, you know, 40 cents a transaction today
and fluctuating.
You know, and some of these other, I mean, some of the IoT and some of these other applications, I mean, you know, you can't scan the QR code of a, you know, zucchini in the store because you want to see if it's truly, you know, organic, and then, you know, suddenly it was $1.50 to that transaction. Those applications just don't exist until you get something like Hashgraph, which you know, provide scale, the fixed pricing. You know, I've always been kind of you know, I kind of look at a lot of the white paper claims and the Twitter claims that people make about DLT capacity and you know, what these guys can do in testnet and all the other kind of things. You know, you just look at the pricing model. I mean, if you can't offer fixed USD pricing, then you obviously have some capacity limitations somewhere, and that's why you have variable pricing.
Right.
So it's that fixed pricing model, I think, that is the low fixed cost
secret sauce.
Yeah, it's what makes you know, Web3 is a disruptive technology, but it's getting those Web3 technologies into Web2 companies is where the disruption really happens. You know, Web3 sitting in, you know, DeFi kind of casino playgrounds where you're thinking you're going to disintermediate all those Web2 companies, you know, that's not really, you know, where the disruptive innovation happens. It's the developing the tools that get Web3 technologies into Web2. And I think that's what Hedera is doing. I mean, you look at the stablecoin studio, the real world asset studio, the NFT studio. You look at a lot of the different open source tools that are now being developed. It's Hashgraph as the enabler, and now it's developing all these tools that kind of bridge to the Web2 companies. So,
absolutely. I saw someone post on X the other day that kind of got me thinking. They posted the phrase Moore's Law squared. And I think it was someone, it might have been the CEO of Anthropic or some kind of AI company, but you do get that sense that, like, as you've mentioned, we have a hockey stick moment of innovation, but now it's like the hockey stick is like going straight up at a certain point. And it does feel like that in this industry. And then where my mind goes now is kind of like the present moment. And I want to kind of get your thoughts on this as well. When we look at Hedera, Hashgraph, the technology, the network, whatever it might be, how do we reconcile kind of like what has been determined like short-term success for these networks that has come from, like you mentioned, like the casinos, the degen stuff, NFTs, those kinds of things, I think have generated billions of dollars for some of these other networks. So how do we kind of navigate that, as well as the long-term viability of this technology, which is where I think Hashgraph really is differentiated from the rest? It feels like to me we're in a situation where in the short term, for kind of the survival to the top 5, Hedera is kind of having to play a bit of a different game. And it's of course got the ace up its sleeve for the long term, but it does feel like Hedera's kind of in a weird way out of its element a little bit, but as we're seeing, it's starting to gain some real traction. But I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on if you're kind of feeling that too, or.
Yeah, it's, the one thing about these, tokens and the this decentralized platform is, you don't have the issuer, like you have in equities or, fixed income. You've got, companies that speak to investors. They take responsibility for informing investors. They provide estimates and analyst days and investor relations departments, and they kind of communicate a strategy. Whereas, that isn't happening. I don't know whether it could or how it should be done better. But I think that's, you're told that this is an enterprise grade network and they're going for enterprise customers, and and it looks like we missed a lot of opportunities because other tokens go up and they have the TVL and the liquidity, and there's success on those metrics, and you don't get an explanation as to why we shouldn't worry about that, or what metrics we should be looking at instead of that. We get updates, kind of news, technology becomes available, and it's kind of up to the community to fill in the blanks. So I don't really know how, I don't think that, governing council's ever going to have an investor relations department, but, I mean, you don't want to be a security, but there's got to be a way to communicate to HBAR holders. I mean, you coined the phrase, right? The retail pays the bills.
I'm not wearing the hat today. I should have worn the hat. Damn, but yeah.
You look. I mean, there's the Hashpoint. There's the HBAR distribution models you can look at, and it quantitatively proves that there's retail pays the bills. I mean, the average account size is low thousands of dollars, and but I don't know I don't know what the right model is for a decentralized entity, communicating to, or a decentralized network. The governing council could take some responsibility for better communication to holders, and why the retail DeFi piece and the successes of the other networks aren't happening on Hedera, and maybe communicate why why we shouldn't be looking for those, and what we should be looking for.
Right.
But the other thing too is, I mean, look, we just did 70 billion transactions.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, it's kind of there are metrics that would suggest that there's some successes being had, but it's not reflected in the token price, and ultimately that's what everybody's in it for. This isn't an altruistic endeavor. People don't volunteer their capital with no expectation of a return. So when you're not getting the return, it does. You do say, well, maybe enterprise isn't the DLT strategy. Maybe I should just go join the herd. And
right. Yeah, I feel you 100%. And I think that, when I listen to things like, for example, on Spaces earlier this year, and I keep bringing this up on the show because I think it's just so on point. Charles, the president of Hedera, was asked the question by a community member, are we going to see retail adoption before we see enterprise adoption, or vice versa? And his argument, again, as the president of Hedera, was, you have to have retail adoption for enterprise adoption, right? The issue is that enterprises, I feel my sense is, for a long time, enterprises come to Hedera, or Hedera goes to enterprises and goes to that market and says, we want to be the network for you. We want you to use us. Enterprise says, well, you guys need more retail activity. And Hedera goes, but no, we want you. and I think that there's this change now happening where, as Charles outlined, it's not about, do we go retail or enterprise? I don't think that's what this is about. It's retail is a stepping stone to enterprise, stable coin liquidity, and then retail focused applications like DeFi and borrowing and lending and the casinos and NFTs and this and that. If you can get that stuff on your network and gain that mind share, that's, I think, because at the end of the day, how enterprises choose networks are, they just do what the guys in the CTO's office says to do, or they go on the network that everybody on the board is invested in or whatever. And largely that's just following the herd to Ethereum, to Solana, to wherever. And these are the kinds of moves that, before you hopped on, I was sharing that post of, again, Charles, the president, with that Grelf meme of a fax he received. And it's those kinds of things that I think we start to see that change of Hedera. Okay, we'll focus on retail. We'll play that game for the short term because it's clear that what they've been doing maybe has fallen short, and the addition of this stuff will kind of help things move along. And also, to your point on kind of investor relations stuff, this is a decentralized space. And what you're getting at, I think, is investor relations is going to look really different in this decentralized world versus a world where you're dealing with companies that have a very traditional way of doing this. And Hashpoint kind of seems to be a little seed of that idea of like, this is what investor relations could look like in a decentralized world.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, it was built for HBAR investors. I mean, it was, the data is curated so that it matters, but you don't want to clutter the site with every piece of data that you could. I mean, it's endless. But yeah, coming from traditional the traditional capital markets where financials are packaged for you. There, you got your Ks and your Qs and your earnings calls, and then you come over to the DLT space, and there's more data than I mean, it'd be like if somebody dumped every Apple receipt on your desk every quarter, but you'd have every Apple transaction, but it'd be unusable.
Right.
So that's the with Hgraph's mirror nodes and the Hashpoint front end, it's a tool and a platform for packaging that data and turning that data into useful information. and it's foreign investors. So yeah, I mean, if it's it can't ever be an investor relations because it'll never speak for Hedera.
Right. Yeah.
But in terms of providing that platform that where an investor can go and look at meaningful numbers and look at meaningful trends and the right data series, and then understand how it plays into valuation, then certainly that's the point. And this first iteration, the launch of it, is the data that matters right now. But as the network changes, as the transaction mix changes, as the use cases start to diversify, then the Hashpoint will keep up with that, and our platform's going to reflect that.
Right on. Okay, so I wanted to dive into Hashpoint a little bit, and I think that one of the reasons I called the title of this show, Information is Power Part 2, is because I did an episode where I had the HBAR Bull as a guest on, and I called that episode Information is Power. And it was, he had just been let go from the HBAR Foundation. And we were talking about a few different things. And it feels like Hashpoint is like an answer to some of those conversations. And a lot of those conversations are just focused around a lack of transparency for HBAR investors. Now we're starting to see some more of that, and Hashpoint is a big piece of that. And I know that maybe you're not like the main technical mind behind the actual application, but I was just curious if we could just take a minute and kind of talk about, like, we talk about all of these mountains of data. How does this thing work? Like, how does all of this, these 70 billion transactions get funneled into the Hashpoint platform that create all these wonderful insights around this?
There's an output I want to see, and I'll just toggle over to the.
Yeah, go for it. I was joking with Brian before the show. I was like, I don't even know if we're going to get to look at the platform, because could see us just rambling on about Hedera for forever. But I'll throw your screen up here. Let's dive in.
And it's funny. I mean, HBAR Bull, I was just had a bit of a discussion with him on on this here. I wanted to see, for example, I wanted to see how the HBAR staked for rewards was responding to the APY. And, I made the comment that, when this change was made from 6.5% to a max 2.5%, the amount of HBAR stake for reward continued to go up and then eventually plateaued. And he said, nah, I don't think so. It kind of looks to me like once that announcement was made, that's when the HBAR stake for reward began to plateau, and had the APY not been cut, or maybe not been cut so severely, then this number would have still gone up. Yeah, right. It's like we're just two guys with two different interpretations of the data, and that's what it's for. Yeah. But that's that's how this comes about. It's there's data, or a data set that I think is important to look at, that's got relevance on the dynamics of the network and valuation going forward. And I tell my brother what I want to see, and he
gotcha.
He writes the he writes the code, and here it is.
Right on. That's so awesome. Yeah, because a lot of this stuff, because it's so new, and I think because people in the Hedera ecosystem are technical people, they're analytical people. I think that when we look at these types of tools, a lot of times people are like, how does this work? Like, what's going on here? And like from our end at Hgraph, it's really like, we've got these dozens of terabytes of data on our infrastructure and our servers and hard drives, and through our APIs, we can deliver that data to Hashpoint. And this is like really the magic of what this is all about is with these mirror nodes, with this data layer of Hedera, this, as I kind of call it, the other half of the network. That's the other half is consensus nodes, putting transactions in. This is about getting transactions out. The beautiful thing about this is, as you pointed out, yeah, this is just a clump of data that doesn't make any sense. But if we, at Hgraph as a mirror node provider can make this data available quickly in large chunks, it just unlocks so many possibilities. And as soon as I learned about Hashpoint, when you guys reached out to us, I was like, this is like, as a community member, this is what I've been waiting for. These are the answers to, well, maybe not the answers. It's the foundation for conversation. To kind of to your point, we can disagree on things. We can have debates about staking economics and different stuff. But I think what this is really about is let's have those conversations on solid ground now and be able to kind of move forward knowing where we are,
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think the staking APY is one of the best case in points at the moment. I mean, it's topical. I mean, it's a low number and it's way below. I mean, you've got a low staking APY and you've got a token that's underperforming. I mean, I think we're 42 ranked now, and
Right.
versus it had been what 31, 32 for
we got in the 20s at one point, I think.
yeah. So and then the staking APY is low. So that it creates issues, and they're valid questions. I mean, should the staking APY be higher? I mean, I personally typically fall more into the real yield camp, where the staking reward should be paid out of network transactions. But there's legitimate arguments to make that topping off that account and paying some higher nominal yield until the transactions pick up is justified. I mean, there's a way to split the difference. But when you look at we were about 500,000 HBAR negative daily at the 6.5% APY, and now we're as that chart showed, and I could pull it back up if
go ahead.
But as that chart showed, the
this is really interesting, by the way, everyone watching. This is one of the things I think that really surprised me the most when you kind of highlighted this in the data on Hashpoint. Yeah. This is really what surprised me.
I mean, I think this is a kind of you kind of look at the green bars here, and this account 800 is now positive. These aren't big numbers by any stretch, but now the APY is it's bottomed, and you could kind of have a forecasting panel here, which is at the current APY, this is kind of the trend. It's not really I mean, it's in a year or so at this rate, it'd be close to 1% again. But in any event, I think this is kind of an important and refreshing bit of data. I mean, is there? I mean, look, Hedera could have run at these kind of negative numbers for years with the
right.
If they wanted to take unallocated HBAR and top up 800 with it. But again, I kind of fall more in the the real yield camp, and I'm not invested in Hedera for 0.2% yield or even a 6.5% yield. I mean, it's if this is microprocessors in 1971, then we're in it for quite a bit more growth and quite a bit more appreciation than what the current staking rewards are on any specific day.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And it brings up something in my mind that is interesting, which is we touched on this, which is like, okay, staking's low. And there's talks about real staking versus, we could call it, subsidized staking maybe. And that it kind of, to me, feels the same as almost like the Atma IO discussion, right? And the Atma IO discussion is like, okay, so we've got this use case. The HBAR Foundation is giving Atma HBAR to pay for their use case, but also Rob Allen on the governing council is telling us that, Atma has really invested substantially in their infrastructure for the use case. So the question is Atma going to keep using Hedera after the use case is no longer subsidized? And all these kind of questions come to mind. To me, it feels kind of the same way with staking, right? Which is, okay, so on one side, we've got a camp that's like, let's just do real staking, right? Let's have the network dictate the staking based off of in and out, right? That equilibrium that you've brought up that we'll touch on shortly, but the real staking. But then you look at the benefits of the subsidized element of Atma IO, and it's like, to your point, wow, 70 billion transactions. Like what a efficient marketing spend, you could say, because it's going right back into the network, right? It's not like we're giving Atma a bunch of money and they're selling HBAR to pay employees. That HBAR is cycling right back into treasury and right back into people staking to the network. So that's an interesting dynamic. You take that thinking and bring it back to staking and you go, well, what if, Hedera or some other organization were to dump, a couple 100 million HBAR into account 800 or whatever? It's like, well, that just kind of cycles back into the ecosystem. It's not like governing council members are staking, and well, they are staking, but they don't get rewards. But, it's definitely great marketing for the network. I mean, HBAR with a 6.5% yield is very attractive versus a 0.2% yield. So do you kind of see it that way? Like as an example of like a bit of analogous to Atma IO and then subsidized staking?
Yeah. I sometimes read the, comments in, Reddit or other social media forums. And it's, there's the criticism that Atma doesn't pay for its transactions, but people want, higher staking rewards. The subsidized Atma transactions, as you point out, feed into the staking. So yeah. You subsidize Atma, you subsidize the staking rewards.
Right.
So if you don't want to subsidize Atma, then you kind of sacrifice. You take those HBAR from Atma and put them directly into the staking account. That doesn't make sense. But on the Atma, I'm not that concerned about. My sense is, and I don't know this for certain, but Atma is a platform that existed before they connected Hedera to it. They have 30 billion connected products. Hedera is a feature of Atma. And what I think might be going on is that Atma itself is a platform, and then you have to develop applications on top of Atma. And it very well could be that Atma has its own customers that are developing their own, applications on top of the network that use Hedera, and these HBARs that go to Atma then are given to their own customers that are developing their own. So it's to support Atma's customers as they develop their applications that use the DLT. I mean, I have zero concern that Atma is going to, disconnect Hedera and say, yeah, nobody wants or needs, the DLT features. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, when you look at kind of the regulatory path that the world seems to be on with carbon tracking and trading and digital product passports and the carbon, the emission scope 1, 2, and 3, the need for things like Hedera are only growing. I mean, those things are not optional. Those aren't features that maybe we include, maybe we don't. I mean, if they're required from a regulatory standpoint, then it becomes, how do we implement it? How do we implement it cost effectively? And I think that's why Hedera is plugged into Atma, and then you got the Guardian, which is plugged into Hedera, and but I don't. I think the mistaken thinking is that as soon as Atma turned on the Hedera functionality, there were applications already running on Atma that needed Hedera. I think those applications then needed to be built by Atma's customers, and so I think it's that kind of, that's where the subsidized HBAR comes from. It's not to encourage Atma not to disconnect Hedera or to keep giving them free HBAR or else they won't use it, or any of those kind of scenarios. I think it's very much just kind of a pump priming.
Gotcha. Yeah, people talk about the carts and horses and chickens and eggs, and this is really what it's about. It's, Avery Dennison, governing council member, Atma.io, under Avery Dennison, and it's not like they're just going to be able to give this new offering to the customers and say, hey, here's this new thing, and go through that whole cycle. To your point, this is, you could view it as kind of like a free trial for their customers, or a subsidized trial, or just them being able to say, hey, hook this in, get the benefits of this, get hooked to this new service from Atma.io. And it's very interesting that you bring up kind of the regulatory components and the SOC 1, 2, and 3, is because the other interesting side to this is it's not just kind of saying, hey, this might be popular in the future. You're legally going to be required to record these types of data in this fashion. And so that's the other interesting element to this, is truly it's a matter of when, not if. And the missing ingredient is, can Hedera get out in the forefront seemingly at any cost and making good enough progress? So I share your sentiment that I'm not too worried about Atma.io. I don't know what the chances are of another deal like that happening, but I think it was necessary for many different reasons. And just from a marketing standpoint, I'm not going to turn my nose up at 70 billion transactions.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I mean, I think there's, the implementation of Hedera in business processes is, and the efficiencies, everything, it just makes good business sense. It's not simply a regulatory kind of driven obligation. There's one piece of the Atma ecosystem that I think is, really tremendous, which is Wiliot, which is a IoT application. They make battery-free Bluetooth transmitters that roll off.
How does that work?
They're like, it's ambient energy.
Gotcha. Okay.
It is one of the coolest. I thought it was, when I first read it, I had to make sure I wasn't reading April 1 kind of.
Same as Hashgraph, like, this can't be this good.
It's an amazing, and I saw a interview with, that Max Winograd did with somebody from Wiliot, and it sounds like the idea for Atma came from Wiliot.
Gotcha.
From what Wiliot was doing. So it's just there's a really interesting relationship there. Avery Dennison manufactures the Wiliot Bluetooth tags. These things are like postage stamps. But you can connect them. You can connect them to virtually anything, and you're not looking at Internet of Things where you need radio gateways and all the other high equipment, expensive equipment. They can measure temperature and humidity, and on vegetable crates, and but the amount of information and efficiency that kind of technology brings into food supply chains, the amount of waste it eliminates. Again, it's not just a regulatory requirement, but it just makes good economic sense. And those guys, they call themselves the Internet of trillions.
Yeah.
And that's a piece of, so that's another piece of Atma. That's another connected piece to Atma. So I don't really worry about, Hedera's, stickiness within Atma. I mean, I just think Atma is in its infancy, and it's gonna grow, and as it does, so will the Hedera transactions.
I love that. Yeah, I really appreciate you kind of taking this deep dive on Atma kind of unexpectedly, because it is one of those things that I feel this community and this ecosystem, it is such a big piece of our ecosystem, but we've kind of gone like, all right, whatever, let's move on kind of thing. But it is worth kind of still lingering on it a little bit, because there is more to unpack. It's not like Atma.io switched it on and has done nothing. Their parent company and them have continued to innovate in different ways. So I appreciate that. I want to steer the conversation into a new area, but I think I appreciate kind of diving in on Atma.io.
But that's another one of those areas where, there's that whole investor relations, the absence of somebody that can, educate the community on, I'm kind of perplexed as to why nobody has been able to say, this is why we subsidize Atma currently. It's just kind of perplexing that nobody's figured out how to it's a basic piece of information, and it's topical, and people, it pops up all the time. I don't know why there isn't somebody, just being responsive, just tweet out an answer. This is
this is the thing that I agree is so frustrating. We're seeing some comments already agreeing with, Brady, 100, 1,000% agreed, is that I think that's the frustrating thing. It's the pushback that I've seen to that point of, like, to your example, why doesn't Avery Dennison or Atma.io or whatever kind of speak to Hedera a little more? Or why doesn't Hedera speak about some of the different context and reasoning for some of these choices, why they do or don't do things? And it's like some of the pushback on the former is like, well, Avery Dennison doesn't want to say because it's their secret sauce, and if people find out they're using Hedera, then their competitors can start using it. And it's like, I don't get that component. It's not like if a competitor of Atma.io finds out about Hedera, they're going to one up Atma.io or something. So it's like,
I thought the governing council was supposed to be encouraging these cases.
Yeah, that's
not hiding their involvement.
That's exactly it. It felt so weird. I put out a tweet the other day where I was like, should governing council members be ambassadors of the Hedera network? And it was so weird that I had to type that out, because it is still a lingering question that remains unanswered. And if any echo comes back on that from leadership, it's always something that just feels like side skirting, like, oh, they, you don't talk about your technology stack. Nobody cares about that. People are going to use this and not realize they're using it, this and that. But kind of to our earlier conversation, it's like, long-term, sure. The world will use Hedera. That sounds great. But what about right now? Trying to get off the ground, trying to get critical mass, network effects. Like, why doesn't Avery Dennison, why doesn't Hedera do these kinds of things more, these investor relations more? Because I agree with you. It would solve so many problems. Like, here's why this use case is handled in the way that it's handled. Here are the upsides and downsides. Why can't Hedera do something like that when a lot of traditional companies do things like that?
Yeah, or just say, you know what, we can't speak to Atma or Avery Dennison, but in theory, the reason we would subsidize a use case is here's a couple of reasons why it makes sense for us to do that. There's ways to address those kinds of concerns. And ultimately, when you talk about it, putting retail first, that's the kind of, I don't know that, more DeFi and DeFi protocols will matter, too much. But, if you give people the information and, you told them this, they're invested in a 100-year company, you kind of have to give you can't just wait 100 years and say, see,
exactly.
There's got to be a way to give the updates and answer the questions. And, make sure things are on track. And when something comes up repeatedly, like the question about Atma's HBARs being subsidized, there needs to be a mechanism of just communicating to the community, why that's done and in what situations and circumstances it's done.
100%.
It doesn't seem that difficult.
And it's so intertwined. Like when we talk about, again, short-term versus long-term, retail-focused use cases versus enterprise, it's like they're all intertwined at a certain point. Like a great example is like borrowing and lending. It's like that can sometimes be viewed as, degen or DeFi or whatever. But again, when we look at how do enterprises choose the networks they're going to be that they're going to be building on right now, it's TVL. It's those kinds of metrics that I agree can sometimes be overplayed and not super accurate of a network's health. But what we've seen with what the stats show is across crypto, I think it's near or over half of TVL comes from borrowing and lending, which Hedera is lacking at a certain point. And so we look at platforms like Bonzo Finance that want to get launched on Hedera that need that support to do that. And I think that they've been, largely under supported in those different ways. It's those kind of retail use cases that I think create these environments where we have, enterprises are going to need better stablecoin liquidity. They're going to need more people holding HBAR. They're going to need these different types of things. They're going to need the price of HBAR to go up to secure the network. There's a direct correlation between how secure Hedera is and the price of HBAR. So I think how I view it is definitely not so much as, retail focused use cases versus enterprise. It's like they really need each other. And I think in the short, medium term, I think that enterprise use cases need the retail focused use cases. And I think that there just needs to be a larger focus placed on those kinds of things, even if it feels like a bit of a temporary detour from the original vision of Hedera. I think that's the sense that we're getting is like, there's different paths to 100 years,
Yeah. I mean, throw everyone a bone and, you don't have to, you can deviate. You can deviate off of the enterprise, the enterprise only track. Yeah, certainly.
We can have some fun.
Yeah, God forbid.
We can, on this network, we can gamble and lose money faster than any other network, 3 to 5 seconds finality and carbon negatively. So the future is now. There's just kind of bringing it back to Hashpoint and, we've already been talking for 45 minutes. This is fantastic. I wanted to just open up another topic, which is revenue. And this is something that, again, like at Hashgraph or at Hgraph, we kind of introduced it with HederaRevenue.com in a rudimentary kind of user-friendly way. But Hashpoint is fantastic because your front end just really granulizes so many different things, provides that historical look at revenue. And what people are able to really drill down on is that valuation model as well. And what ties, I think, all of this together is, for sure, Hedera has fixed fees, but that doesn't mean that every service on Hedera costs the same to transact. Yeah. And again, another shocking statistic that you've shared is when you look at the revenue mix on Hedera, right? And for folks unfamiliar kind of with this concept, 'cause I think some of this stuff is new to many people, is, Atma.io processes 99.9% of transactions on the network, but they pay a very small fee for those transactions. So they actually only represent 80% or 85% of revenue on the network. And something that you've brought up, and I'll pull up your screen for you too, is something that you brought up that I find shocking is what happens when we change that revenue mix? If you've pointed out, if we change it 1%, it can have an absolutely drastic impact on the revenue generated by Hedera, AKA the money coming back to stakers, back to holders, back to the treasury. It's fascinating.
Yeah, this is the, this is currently being pulled from the network. So the transaction mix is 99.9% consensus service. but even this 0.1% is 8% of total revenue. And if you just do the math here, the other services are 88 times that. It'll depend on the mix of the other services, but right now it's about 87 times. The revenue is about 87 times consensus. So if you were to take
real quick, I just want to just like really emphasize that for people listening, because I really want to make sure people get this, is what the data shows generated by the Hedera network is that 0.1% of the transactions sent to the network is responsible for almost 9% of revenue generated by the network. It's pretty wild.
And to see the sensitivity, if you just take this down to 98.9, so just
Wow.
a 1%, 100 basis point shift. Now you see that 1.1% of the transactions, that's almost half. That's now 50% of the network's revenue.
It's like a 4x or 10x or something.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, there's just a ton of sensitivity in this. I mean, in this scenario, right, I've just got 5,000 TPS in there. And that produces 30.8 million of network fees. In the original scenario, it was 17. So it's about an 80% increase in revenue just by that 1% change in the transaction mix. So yeah,
it's mind blowing.
It is. It's important. So yeah, you look for those kind of use cases that are going to come on and start to ramp up some of those other services. I don't know. Nobody has any insight into the use cases in the pipeline and what the transaction mix might look like in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. So I don't know how to model that with any degree of certainty, but you can certainly play with the sensitivity here.
That's so crazy. And just kind of staying on the screen for a minute, this is your valuation model. This is kind of what we touched on previously, was this equilibrium curve, and the red dot is kind of where we are. And how you've outlined it is basically it's, put simply, it's money in, money out. And if you have more money coming in than you have going out, you can run into problems. If you have more money going out than it's coming in, you can run into problems. So you really want that red dot, based off of the different parameters you adjust, to be riding nice and snug along that equilibrium curve, to have that longevity success of the network. And this is your valuation model. This I find is like the real kind of gem of Hashpoint.
Yeah, it's a proof of stake network, and this model is based on the binding constraint on all proof of stake networks, that the value that comes into the network, over the long term, you need to be in equilibrium, will be the value that comes out. So, it's kind of a nonprofit where, the revenues generated become the rewards paid out. And that's what this model shows. And it's interesting because, we price, the network is priced in dollars paid in HBAR. So the amount of HBAR flowing into the network is variable at any TPS, while you've got kind of a algorithmically defined staking reward APY on any level of HBAR stake. So it's kind of a fixed HBAR out with a variable HBAR in. And so what you get is this equilibrium curve, which shows the relationship between the price of HBAR and a staking reward APY, the APY that would put the network in equilibrium depending on the scenario you want to look at. So I mean, just to have fun.
Let's have some fun. I dig it. How many TPS are we going for, Brian?
I maxed it at 500. Just whatever. Let's go
500,000.
Well, let's do something. Let's go 50.
Okay. I'd be happy with 50,000 TPS. Let's do it.
So at 50,000 TPS, and we keep the transaction mix right where it is. the network, and this is math. This is not, nobody can look at this and say, that's impossible.
Right.
The network fees would be 171 million. This I put in here because the first claim on revenue should be the operating expenses, that
Right.
go to account 98.
How much does it cost to run the network?
Yeah, before you can even allocate to rewards. But this, I said, I'm going to leave this at 0, and I'll explain why in a second.
Okay.
So you've got 171 million now net available for rewards. The current allocation is 10% goes to the account 800. So that's why I set this to 0, because this kind of reflects the current parameters.
Gotcha.
10% of revenue goes to account 800. So that's what this shows. But you can play with this, if you want to make an assumption that it gets 50-50 divided between 800 and 801 for staking rewards. But then on the way out, you've got the big variable is the amount of HBAR staked for rewards. Set for the network is currently 6.774 billion. These are, again, pulling real numbers from the network.
Right.
But if you set that at 7 billion, what you've got is at the current APY, the fair value equilibrium in this, the price of HBAR would have to rise to $1.19 for the amount of HBAR flowing into the network to equal the amount of HBAR flowing out of the network.
Gotcha.
And anywhere on this curve, you're in equilibrium.
Right.
So if the staking reward, went up to, 0.51, then the equilibrium price is 48 cents. So it's that trade-off between the price of HBAR, which influences a variable amount of HBAR flowing into the network, against the staking APY, which is the determinant for the amount of HBAR flowing out. So it's a simple, if you sit with it for a little bit, it seems screwy for a little bit, but if you actually sit with it, it makes sense. And just do the math. Start with, the HBAR price times TPS is your US dollars flowing into the network. And then you've got HBAR stake times APY is your flowing out. And you'll see that, you've got to ultimately in the long run be in equilibrium. Mm-hmm. And anywhere on this curve that condition is satisfied. But if the market is going to be at 0.2% staking APY, then the equilibrium price of HBAR is $1.22.
Right.
And there's a couple of points. There's a couple of points here. People that say just randomly HBAR can never get to, and they pick a dollar price. That's phony and false. And people that say that there is a market cap constraint on the price of HBAR, it's also phony, because because you'd be arguing that some nominal market cap is more important than the real yield you could get from the network. And I'm going to write something up on that. There's a blog on here where I get to write my thoughts and opinions, and something I enjoy. But I'm going to add something on that topic. But that's essentially the valuation model.
That's amazing.
And it's interactive, so anyone can play with it and make their own assumptions and scenarios and get themselves excited.
I love that. It's a learning tool. It's a learning tool, I think, both for the community, for HBAR investors, but as people have kind of highlighted in the comments, also, potentially the governing council and some of these folks that, in many ways, need to get on the same page. It's the one thing that we can't argue is the fact that just as an ecosystem and as a community, we're just not on the same page with a lot of things, whether it's due to, again, a lack of transparency, differing opinions, whatever it may be. A tool like this at least gets us on in the same book, maybe in the same chapter, and I think that's a start, because for a very long time, things have felt very in not a good sense, decentralized, you could say.
Yeah.
So I'd like my mind to become less decentralized for a bit as we kind of really dive into this. But I think that, we've been talking for about an hour here, and I really appreciate your time. And I just had a couple more questions, kind of just, packing this all up. But this is just an incredible conversation. I think a lot of people have found it valuable. We've got a lot of great comments. So, it's clear that the Hedera ecosystem has grown. HBAR investors, as I said before our interview, are really getting more and more hungry for these kind of tools as they've had a bit of a taste now. And looking back, we didn't really have many analytics tools. And now looking forwards, what impacts do you think platforms like Hashpoint are going to have on this ecosystem?
What I hope is that the HBAR holders just become more, they get the perspective and context and more knowledgeable about the asset and the dynamics. And again, you don't have to agree with. I mean, you can look at. I encourage anyone to play with the model and poke holes in it and tell me where it's wrong. And same with the HBAR bull said, yeah, I think I kind of disagree with your opinion on the staking APY and its correlation to the HBAR staked. And it's like, I want to have those discussions. I want to be able to engage and not just, throw spitballs at people in Reddit. It's
yeah, exactly.
It's a lot more fun to have a loaded, to have a discussion around, with that context. So that's what I think the analytical tools do. I think that's what the platform does. I think it's what your show does, and the HBAR bull. I mean, it provides perspective and content, and this is just another piece of content for the community.
Right.
And I just I hope it just provides. I hope it makes people more knowledgeable and comfortable, and you don't have to like the staking APY at 0.2, but maybe you've got some understanding of maybe why it's there and what the governing council's thinking is on that. Again, you don't have to like it, but at least you can be disgruntled and informed as a person.
That's what I should have called this episode: disgruntled and informed.
I mean, that's. I guess that's what I'm looking for, is to create more disgruntled and informed.
I love it. I love it. Disgruntled and informed. I love it. I mean, the other thing too, like, it's really been cool to see the story of Hashpoint kind of unfold, especially in the last few days, like just seeing you guys like blow up on social media and just everybody kind of embracing the platform. I think it's so great. Are you, obviously you are, but like, new features? Are there bigger visions in play? What can people look to for the future for Hashpoint?
Well, certainly new models that are relevant. I don't want to. I want the site to be usable. A touch point. If it gets too cluttered with transactions segmented by node 16. I mean, no,
you can have too much information.
It just becomes clutter, and you lose focus. So, but as the network changes, I mean, right now there's no use case section on the platform that's kind of under development. But right now there's only one use case, so one that really matters. But as those come on. The platform will change. The blog, the insights section is, my background. I've written investment research for 20 plus years. So that's what that's for. And, I'd like to, if I can, like talk to Max Winograd, and really, not talk to him about, the atma and how many transactions we can expect and that kind of thing.
Right.
But really kind of get into the the nuts and bolts of
The whys.
yeah, whys. Some of the stuff we don't know, that we should know, that again would provide more information for your disgruntlement. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. The disgruntlement informed equilibrium is what we have to maintain. And if someone is watching this and they're like, oh my God, I've got to get my hands on this stuff, I got to dive into Hashpoint. How can they get full access? How can the community get involved?
Well, it's the dashboard is free, and we because data isn't free. It costs money to run the site. We tried to price it so that it was as accessible to anyone, and if there is anyone who wants access and can't afford, it's $10 a month if it's for an annual subscription. But if there's anyone who can't afford that, I mean, just reach out and we'll set you up. But the idea was to make it affordable enough and accessible enough to everybody.
Right on. I mean, it's a Netflix subscription at this point. If you can get your Netflix, you
without
can get
the ads.
yeah, without the ads. There you go. I love it. I love that. Like this is so valuable. And this is, again, just zooming out a little bit. One of the things that I love about Hashpoint, and again, being in the data business myself at Hgraph, and you guys really being a part of our ecosystem, is like, this is what I've really wanted to see, both from a higher level, which is really novel products and services that cost $10 a month that people in this ecosystem can afford and use, that gives them value. That's something that is so important for me to see, because it's not just like Hashpoint is this giant conglomerate that focuses on a bunch of other networks and stuff, and Hedera is like a spoke in their wheel. This is a project that's emanating from within the Hedera ecosystem, from a group of intrinsically motivated HBARbarians with this tool. And furthermore, it's on the data side, right? This isn't about putting transactions into the network, which we talk about a lot. It's about the other half of this network. My business, mirror nodes, data. I'm so passionate about this. So huge kudos to you guys. And just, it's so refreshing for me to just see use cases like yours, where it's like, hey, it's a monthly subscription, get a bunch of value. It's so easy for people to understand. And it's so cool because it's designed by HBARbarians for HBARbarians. Yeah. And many people said it couldn't be done. Here it is.
Yeah, and you guys, I mean, you guys have been above and beyond. I mean, great to work with. I mean, when we wanted data and we couldn't access it, within a day, there's an API for us to go get right that on. Data. And in terms of the launch, you guys have been, again, terrific partners.
I think, we're just trying to live up to the standards of this community. I think we find that everywhere. As soon, like, a message to anyone curious about building on Hedera. Sure, the ecosystem might be a bit smaller. Sure, we've got our problems. Brian and I have been whining about it here for, an hour, but it's such a welcoming community. It's such a vibrant community, an informed community now. And I think that when you get in here, you just find that helping hands are everywhere that you look. And that's what really this is about. I've had the same treatment in the ecosystem. So it's just about paying it forward. So it's been an absolute pleasure helping you guys kind of break into the ecosystem and use our data. That's what it's there for. So I love it. So was there anything else that you wanted to touch on that we didn't get a chance to? I know this interview has been more just like a conversation.
I think we touched on more than I planned on, but
right on.
Yeah, no, I think we covered a lot of ground, and it was well worth it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brian. Well, great to have you on the show. I'll have you back for sure. And everyone, check out Hashpoint. And yeah, really appreciate the time, Brian. Thank you.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
Right on. So, Brian, what a fantastic conversation. This is one that I think we're going to be having more of in the future. I hope. As we were talking about on the show, this is really something that is new for this ecosystem, something that people have really wanted, and something that we haven't really had for a long time, right? Information, data, transparency, analysis, and not, again, like, Brian also really makes a great point is, sure, we've got all the information that this network generates, but it's in massive databases in Hgraph's servers in data centers and stuff like that. When you look at it, it makes no sense. It's just trillions or billions and billions of rows in a database. How do you compute that? How do you deliver that? How do you make access to it? How do you present it in a way that people can understand, that's useful enough to pay $10 a month for? That's what this is really about. And so for me, this is, I hope, a major trend that's going to be continued, because when we have more information, we get more power, right? That's what this is about. Information is power. And when this community gets more power, we have more control over how this network grows and moves. And as we've seen, the community, although it's messy sometimes, and although there's a lot of debate and argument per se, it's fun, it's lively. And going forward, we're going to be doing it from an informed place. We will be both disgruntled and informed. Coinman, the HBAR comments, integrate drop micropayments. Hey, there you go.